Hey guys, tonight we travel back to the Middle Ages. Not to witness kings or castles, but to uncover a village that ran entirely on wind. No electricity, no engines, just the ancient hum of wind tunnels, turning gears, and stone towers that whispered secrets through air. It sounds like myth, but scattered records hint at a community that harnessed the wind centuries before it should have been possible. So, before we dive into this windswept mystery, hit like if you love forgotten history and subscribe only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing where this journey reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe crack a window, and let's begin. The wind tower that whispered prophecies through the stone walls. Imagine standing beneath a towering windmill at the edge of an ancient forest. Its wooden sails groan against the night wind, turning slowly, rhythmically. But it's not the creaking that unsettles you, it's the hum, a deep, low resonance that flows through the air like a chant, layered, melodic, strange. Locals say it speaks, that on wind-heavy nights, the tower doesn't just groan, it whispers. This isn't legend. It's a real place. A 14th century wind tower in the hills above Brackenford, England. Built in a lonely clearing atop a much older pagan stone circle, it was said to have been erected not just for grain, but for something older, something lost. No village existed nearby when it was first raised. No roads led there, just a circle of standing stones, partially buried, and the wind that never stopped blowing. Monks from a nearby abbey began noticing strange sounds emanating from the structure within weeks of its completion. They described voices in the wind, low, guttural, chanting in an unknown tongue. Some thought it was the devil. Others thought it was a miracle. So they carved what they heard into stone, hundreds of symbols etched into cloister walls and tower foundations. Symbols no one could translate. Not then, not now. Over time, the windmill earned a nickname among the locals, the Oracle Tower. Children were warned not to play too close. Farmers claimed their livestock refused to graze within 100 yards. And always at night, the sound, a murmuring, like voices traveling through the bones of the earth. Some claimed they heard names. Others swore it spoke dates, events that hadn't yet happened. Then, the prophecies began. In the late 1400s, during a brutal winter, a village woman claimed the tower whispered a warning. Fire would fall from the sky. 3 days later, lightning struck the abbey during Mass, killing 6 and burning the nave to the ground. The monks, already wary, panicked. Some believed that the structure was a divine gift. Others, a pagan curse echoing through time. They sealed the windmill with stone and mortar, carved Latin prayers around its base, and abandoned it. But the sounds didn't stop. Travelers who camped nearby reported dreams so vivid they woke with voices still in their ears, words they didn't understand, yet felt compelled to repeat. By the 1600s, the windmill had become the subject of whispered pilgrimage. Wanderers came at night and placed stones around the base in strange arrangements, believing the wind would speak to them. Some returned with frantic drawings, pages filled with looping glyphs and mirrored letters. Others disappeared entirely. A scholar from Cambridge, Edmund Hale, spent 3 years near the site in the 1720s, trying to document the phenomenon. He recorded the exact frequency of the hum, 31.2 hertz, a frequency just at the edge of human hearing. He called it the voice in the bones. He theorized that the tower, built atop ancient stones, somehow conducted wind into harmonic patterns, and that those patterns could trigger auditory hallucinations. But Hale's journals took a darker turn. He began claiming the voice wasn't random, it was intelligent. He wrote that it called him by name, that it told him secrets, things he had never known. His final entry simply read, "It's inside the stone." He vanished days later. His body was never found. In modern times, the tower is a ruin. But the humming remains. Sound engineers have tested it. The vibrations are real. Acoustic anomalies bounce within the structure in unpredictable ways. Researchers recorded whispering sounds layered in the audio, human but distorted. Some phonetic experts say the patterns resemble Proto-European root tongues. Others say it's nothing but wind. But none can explain why the pitch changes on specific nights, always the same calendar days, always just before a storm. The stone carvings from the monks still survive, hundreds of them, tucked away in museum vaults and private collections. Linguists have tried to crack the code, None succeeded. But when run through spectral analysis, some of the carvings match sound waveforms, frequencies, not language, not writing, but music. Local legend claims that if you sleep against the windmill's southern wall on the eve of midsummer, you'll dream of your own death and wake with soil under your nails. That the tower doesn't just speak, it remembers. That it stores the voices of everyone who's ever listened. And yet people still go. Some out of curiosity, some to hear what others fear. Some hoping it really is an oracle, hoping for answers. But few stay long. The hum, they say, gets inside you. You start hearing it in your bones, in your breath, in your own thoughts. And once it's there, it never leaves. No one knows who built the original stones the windmill rests on. No one knows who first heard the voice. But one thing is certain, the tower still speaks. And if you listen long enough, you might just understand what it's saying. Or worse, you might find it starts speaking back. The mill that turned without wind, and then stopped time inside. They said the mill should have been still. There was no breeze, no storm, not even a whisper of wind in the trees. Yet the blades turned, slowly, relentlessly, as if drawn by something deeper than air, as if pulled by a memory older than the village itself. For generations, the people of Hatheridge watched that old wooden windmill atop the northern hill spin through moonless nights when the skies were dead calm. It should have been impossible. But no one questioned it aloud, not after the disappearances, not after the visions. It began as a curiosity. A local boy swore he saw it turning under a starless sky. Farmers said their clocks stopped if they walked too close after dark. Then came the rumors about the ones who went inside. They never vanished. But they never returned quite the same. They'd emerge hours or days later, eyes hollow, voices flat. Some spoke nonsense, others couldn't speak at all, and a few whispered only one thing. The walls remember. The windmill itself was ancient, older than any building in the village. Records didn't list its construction. The deeds vanished in some fire 100 years ago. But the foundation stones bore carvings no mason recognized, symbols that seemed to shift when looked at too long. One wall, exposed beneath peeling plaster, revealed a strange mural, etched figures curled around what looked like a spiral of eyes. No one claimed to have drawn it. But every time someone entered and returned, the mural grew. It didn't matter if the wind blew or not. The sails would begin turning around midnight, creaking like an old throat clearing its memory. The mechanism wasn't powered by gears anymore. Most had rusted decades ago. Yet it spun. Every single time. Villagers once tried chaining the blades, removing the axle, even boarding up the door. But it would always begin again. The chains rusted through within a week. The boards were found stacked neatly by the entrance the next morning. And those who interfered often fell ill, not with any disease a doctor could name, just a slow fading, as if time inside them had unraveled. Some believed the place was haunted, others said it was cursed. But the old women in the village, the ones who remembered the war and the hunger years, told a different story. They said it was a wound, something left open when time cracked and history bled. They warned their grandchildren not to go near it. But curiosity is stronger than fear when you're young, especially when you think you're invincible. One summer, a trio of students from the city came to document the windless mill. Scientists, they claimed. Rational men. They carried notebooks, barometers, and cameras. The villagers watched them climb the hill with laughter in their throats and a cold knot in their chests. The men entered the mill just after sunset. They never screamed, never called out. But the next morning, only one came back down. He was barefoot, eyes bleeding from burst vessels, murmuring the same line over and over. "I was old in there. I was old." They found his companions still inside, unmoving, sitting in separate corners of the upper chamber. Their watches had stopped at exactly the same time. 2:11 a.m., their cameras were ruined, their notes were gibberish, and on the wall behind them was a new carving. 3 human figures, blindfolded, with hourglasses for hearts. That was the last time anyone willingly entered the windmill, but still it turns, even now, especially now, during still nights when the fog clings low and the owls go silent. You can hear it from the village square, a slow, rhythmic groan, like something ancient and breathing beneath rotted wood. No one speaks of it anymore. Not directly. But the children are warned not to climb the hill. The adults won't light fires facing its direction, and no one, Not even the drunk or the brave dares knock on its door, because they all know what it does. It doesn't kill you, it doesn't trap you, it changes you. Inside that mill, something watches, something ancient. It doesn't care for names or flesh. It wants memory. It wants time. And when you enter, it trades your minutes for visions, fractured glimpses of other lives, other deaths, other yous. Some said they saw their own faces age decades beyond recognition. Others claimed to witness their ancestors burned at stakes, buried in plague pits, or marching into wars they never learned about in school. One woman said she stood inside the body of a child she never bore, one that died unborn. Another swore she spoke with herself from the future, only to forget the conversation the moment she stepped outside. The mill doesn't explain. It reveals, and the carvings remain. Every person who enters adds to them, not with hands, but with memory, with fear, with the echoes they leave behind. One wall now bears the outline of a tree with hundreds of names etched into the bark, none of them from the village, none of them found in any book. So what is it? A machine? A relic? A door? No one knows. But it spins even when the wind dies. It breathes even when the world holds its breath. And if you listen closely, beneath the creaking of its sails, you'll hear it counting, ticking through lives it has tasted, moments it has swallowed. The mill doesn't care why you enter. But once you do, it owns part of you, not your body, not your soul, just your time. And it will take it in hours, in years, in the soft erosion of memory. You may walk back out whole, but something inside you won't follow. That's why the villagers no longer ask questions, why no one investigates anymore. They've learned the truth that the outside world never wants to hear. Not every place is meant to be solved. Some places aren't broken. They are the cracks themselves, where time leaks, where reality frays, where memory forgets the shape of itself. And so the windmill turns under a sky that refuses to move, above a hill that holds its secrets in silence, waiting for the next door to open. The hollow blades that played songs no one admitted composing. Imagine standing in an empty field at dusk, watching the windmill turn slowly in the breeze. You hear it, high above, whistling. Not just a creak or groan like any other windmill, but a melody, a song. Slow, dissonant, and haunting. The sound seems too deliberate, too structured to be an accident. Local children hum its notes in their sleep. Villagers walk faster past it when the sky turns gray. And when the wind blows strongest, the blades don't just spin, they sing. This isn't fiction. This is the story of the hollow blades that played songs no one admitted composing, and the tower whose secrets were written in music only the wind could read. It began in the 18th century, in a remote valley in northern Europe, where a miller commissioned a strange design, a set of hollow, tuned blades, carved not just for turning grain, but for channeling sound. Each blade had internal chambers shaped like wind flutes. Local craftsmen thought it eccentric, but the miller insisted it was to keep birds from nesting. Others whispered he had been obsessed with church organs as a boy and wanted his own in the fields. But once construction finished, the stories began. The windmill, even at rest, gave off tones. In motion it produced long, slow notes, melancholic, minor key, with strange harmonic overtones. The melodies were never the same twice. Some claimed they could hear voices in the notes, chanting, pleading. Local priests called it unnatural. They told villagers the sound was a warning, a hymn of sorrow, a signal from heaven or hell. Few dared live nearby. Children, though, were drawn to it. They mimicked the sounds in games. Farmers caught them humming intricate sequences they swore they'd never heard before. Some even began drawing musical notes they couldn't read. But when the parish choir tried to transcribe one of the melodies, the composition contained no known structure. Notes bent strangely. Patterns reversed. Key signatures shifted mid-line. A composer called it music built to dissolve memory. One winter, a visitor from a nearby city, a music scholar, stayed in the village to study the mill. He recorded the sounds and tried to isolate the source of the melodies. He discovered the hollow blades were not uniform. Each had been carved with precision, tones mapped, airflow measured. Someone had turned the wind into a composer. But when he asked who built the blades, no one could answer. The records were missing. The original millwright had died shortly after construction, and his apprentices denied any musical intent. Then came the discovery. During a lightning storm, part of the tower's interior wall was damaged. Behind a collapsed panel, carved into the stone, were rows of musical notation, etched deep, deliberately, like scripture. Lines of staff, notes, and strange markings filled the chamber wall. Yet no one remembered writing them. No one could explain why they had been hidden. Some of the notations matched the windmill's sounds. Others were unreadable, layered atop one another in discordant waves. The church declared it sacrilege. They sealed the mill for years, but even locked, the wind found its way through the slats, and the sound returned, now more erratic, dissonant, like a broken hymn. A few villagers claimed they began hearing the melodies in their dreams, just before fevers, accidents, or death. A priest's journal described the windmill as a mouth that cannot stop confessing. Another simply called it the instrument of memory unasked for. In the early 20th century, a folklorist reopened the site. She copied the wall notations and attempted to reconstruct the songs. What she found disturbed her. Each melody, when played on a pipe organ, mirrored traditional hymns, but reversed, distorted, or inverted. Not pagan, not satanic, just wrong. As if something familiar had been pulled inside out. She stopped her work after claiming she heard new phrases being added to the wall overnight. Today, the tower still stands. The blades, now weather-worn, still catch the wind. Occasionally, tourists report hearing faint tones, like breath through bone. The village no longer speaks of it. Children are warned not to hum the songs. And the sheet music? It's housed in a university archive, labeled anonymously. No one wants to claim authorship. No one wants to admit they hear the tunes when the wind howls. And no one, not the priests, not the scholars, not the descendants of the builders, can explain why, no matter how hard they try, the music keeps returning. Because some songs are written not to be sung, but remembered, and some memories, like wind through a hollow blade, never truly disappear. The mill that gave the blacksmith, the dreams of ancient machines. Imagine a village where the wind never stops, not howling, not screaming, but pulsing, like a breath too old to belong to anything living. This was the rhythm that wrapped itself around the bones of a centuries-old windmill, standing just beyond the edges of mapped roads. And every night, that windmill turned, not with the wind, but with a pattern, a pulse, a whisper. In the 1830s, in a quiet hamlet tucked into the chalk hills of southern England, a blacksmith named Elias Thorne began to speak of dreams, not ordinary ones. Elias had been a man of tools and horseshoes, of the everyday grit that kept carriages moving and doors latched. But these dreams changed him. He said the windmill spoke to him, not in words, but in visions carved into metal and fire. It started with a noise, low, percussive, and repetitive. When the windmill turned at night, its old wooden gears produced a rhythm that slipped through the stone walls and into the minds of light sleepers. Some heard it as music. Others called it a curse. But for Elias, it became a language. Night after night, he dreamed of machines, intricate, rotating, interlocking pieces far beyond anything he'd ever studied or forged. Pulleys without cords, axles that shifted with heat, hinges that locked without nails. And every morning, Elias sketched them feverishly onto soot-covered tables, into the dirt beside his anvil, and even onto the walls of his workshop. Then, he began to build. By day, he crafted strange metal devices. Locals came to watch. Some of the parts had no apparent purpose. Metal coils that vibrated when touched, gears with no teeth, tubes that made harmonic sounds when the wind passed through them. People called them madman's toys. But then someone noticed something. An antiquarian from the nearby market town had come to inspect the windmill for renovation. Inside its circular stone tower, just above the grain chute, were ancient carvings, not decorative, not religious, mechanical, spirals, interlocking rings, wing-like symbols. And when the man saw Elias's forged pieces, his face drained of color. The blacksmith's parts matched the carvings, almost precisely. Word spread. The windmill was older than anyone thought. Older than the village. It may have been built on even older ruins. The stone blocks near its base were unlike any others in the region. darker, denser, smoother. Some had grooves that Elias claimed were blueprints once activated by firelight. He said the dream showed him how light moved across the stone to reveal the mechanisms inside. Scholars dismissed him. But then the local doctor, a skeptic, reported his own encounter. He had fallen asleep near the mill after treating a farm injury late one foggy night. He awoke with the impression of sound patterns in his head, patterns he wrote down almost involuntarily. They matched the sequence of shapes Elias had carved into one of his devices. People started whispering. Had the windmill been a machine itself? Had it been transmitting knowledge through rhythm, knowledge absorbed not by logic, but by something deeper? Could memory exist in stone? Could thought survive in architecture? Elias didn't care for the fame. He began to sleep inside the windmill, claiming the dreams were clearer there. He said he had stopped dreaming of machines and started dreaming of cities, towering metal structures under stars unfamiliar to our sky. He began forging tools he refused to show, saying they were not meant for our time. Some villagers believed he was losing his mind. Others feared he was touching something meant to stay forgotten. Then came the event that sealed the story. One morning, the windmill stopped. No wind, no sound. Elias was found unconscious at its center, surrounded by his devices, none of which could be moved. The metal had fused with the stone floor. Not welded, fused. As if the earth had absorbed them. As if they were returning home. Elias never spoke again. He lived another 5 years in near silence, carving symbols into the wooden beams of his home, which scholars later said resembled ancient proto-mechanical diagrams found in Mycenaean ruins and Babylonian tablets, places Elias had never seen or studied. After his death, the windmill was decommissioned, but when researchers returned in the 20th century to investigate, they discovered something inexplicable. Deep scans revealed chambers beneath the mill, rooms sealed in solid rock, inaccessible but filled with metallic traces. They believed some form of machinery or alloy was buried beneath, yet no known excavation could explain how or why. The carvings had deepened too, as if etched by invisible hands over time. Today, the windmill stands fenced off, owned by a historical trust. Officially, Elias Thorne is listed as a local eccentric. Unofficially, some of his blueprints are studied in mechanical theory courses. One, the so-called inverted gear lattice, was once declared mathematically impossible until a German engineer replicated it in micro-scale robotics. But none of that captures the truth of it, because the question isn't how Elias built what he built. The real question is, who dreamed it first? The wind? The stone? Or something older that once used the rhythm of turning blades to pass messages forward, waiting for someone like Elias to listen? The answers are etched in rust, buried in walls, and lost in sleep. But sometimes, if the windmill creaks just right in the winter dusk, people say you can still hear the rhythm, still feel it, still dream of machines that time forgot. But memory did not. The village that lit its streets with air-driven flame lanterns. Imagine wandering through a village cloaked in fog, where no torches are carried, no fires are tended, yet the streets glow with flickering light. Not the cold blue shimmer of electricity, nor the trembling burn of oil lamps, but steady amber flames, dancing atop iron posts with no visible source of fuel, no smoke, no soot, no one refilling them. Just the hush of the wind, and the whisper of something old moving through the stone vents beneath your feet. This was no fantasy. According to scattered accounts and long-buried records, somewhere between the 14th and 16th centuries, nestled in a mountainous pass where winds howled through carved granite tunnels, there existed a village that had discovered a terrifying and beautiful secret. They lit their streets using air-driven flame lanterns, devices that required no fuel, no wick, no human touch. The lanterns fed on the wind itself, and according to those who dismantled the system centuries later, they carried a hidden price. The legend is known today by few historians and even fewer engineers. It survived in fragments, in the journals of a wandering cartographer, in the marginalia of a monk's manuscript, in the oral history of a now-vanished hamlet. The village had no official name, or, if it did, it was erased with time. But what made it extraordinary was its mastery of air pressure, not for mills or clocks, but for fire. They carved massive ducts through the hills, narrowing and focusing natural wind currents, When the pressure reached the right thresholds, it ignited reactions within sealed chambers, some combination of friction, pressure, and trace minerals that sparked flame. These lanterns stood on every main path. Children played beneath them. Elders gathered near their warmth. They marked crossroads, bridges, entryways, and no one maintained them. There were no wood piles, no oil merchants, no soot-covered workers. The villagers had created a closed system, air in, flame out. No one outside believed it until a regional magistrate came to collect tax and stayed long enough to write of it in his personal journal. Even he admitted he did not understand it. But things began to change. The wind shifted. Some of the lanterns sputtered. Then one went dark. Then another. And when the villagers finally opened the base of the tower to investigate, they found more than soot. They found carvings. Stone engravings inside the vent shafts that had never been touched since construction. They weren't instructions. They were warnings. Do not seek to burn twice what the earth gave once. Let the wind pass. Do not ask it to stay. And finally, the light costs what cannot be paid twice. After that, fear spread faster than the cold. Some villagers began to suspect the lanterns took something in return. Life, memory, warmth of another kind. Others claimed they heard voices in the wind tunnels or saw shadows behind the flames. No one could explain how the system had been built or by whom. It was older than the living elders could remember, and the few blueprints or diagrams had long since faded or been destroyed. The system was dismantled within a generation. One by one, the flame lanterns were taken down, their bases sealed. The wind tunnels collapsed or were filled with stone. The village itself eventually faded, its location marked only by ruins and myths. But those who passed through it in the centuries after told strange stories. Nights that glowed with no moon, warmth that came from cracks in the stone, and always, whispers in the wind. Modern scientists have tried to recreate the mechanism. Some suggest it was a form of primitive gas ignition using natural geological vents. Others argue for an advanced understanding of airflow and chemical reaction. But no theory accounts for the carvings. No explanation satisfies the warning. The light costs what cannot be paid twice. What did it mean? That the system drained something intangible? That the energy was borrowed from a deeper well, one not meant to be touched? Or was it merely superstition layered onto genius? Whatever the truth, one thing remains clear. This village existed in defiance of its time. In an era where fire was labor and danger, they found a way to summon light without effort, warmth without fuel, and it scared them. Not because it failed, but because it worked too well. It was a glimpse of something beyond their control. Today we light our streets with electricity, flicking switches and expecting instant comfort. But somewhere deep in the past, there were people who lit the dark with wind and fire, and paid a price we still don't understand. So if you ever walk a path and feel heat where there should be none, or hear the wind whistle like it remembers a forgotten tune, listen carefully. Somewhere beneath your feet, the stone may still whisper, "The light costs what cannot be paid twice." The mill that drove itself into the ground. Overnight. Imagine waking up in your village one morning to a silence you can't explain. The usual groan of the windmill is gone. The creaking of wood, the rhythmic turning, the steady pulse of the town's life, gone. You walk to the edge of the square, expecting to see the familiar sails cutting through the sky. But instead, what you find stops your breath. The windmill is sinking. Not falling, not broken, sinking. Buried up to its blades, as if the earth had swallowed it in the night. This is exactly what happened in the forgotten village of Witherton in 1623, a place where the central windmill didn't just grind wheat, it defined existence. It stood at the village's heart, tall and proud, turning with every gust of wind that blew down from the northern hills. Generations had maintained it. Children had grown up to its song. And then, one morning, it was halfway underground. Silent. Cold. Immobile. The villagers panicked. They searched for signs of collapse. Cracks in the earth, tremors, floods. But there had been no storm. No rain. No movement in the night. The ground around the mill was dry, undisturbed, except for one thing: the stones. Dozens of them. Newly unearthed, arranged in a perfect ring around the sunken mill. each carved with spirals, symbols, and strange words that no one recognized. They called for the priest. He read what he could aloud, though much of it made little sense. Phrases about the wind's ledger, the ground reclaiming breath, and debt drawn in circles. Some villagers wept. Others fled. One old woman, long considered mad, simply said, "It came for what we borrowed." You see, this windmill wasn't ordinary. Local legend claimed it had been built on an older site, far older. The foundation stones, it was said, were taken from a pagan shrine long buried beneath the fields, a place where, in ancient times, people sang to the wind and fed the soil with blood and fire. When the mill was first built in the early 1500s, strange things began to happen. The winds blew stronger, crops grew faster, the village prospered. But animals wouldn't go near the site, and children said they could hear whispering when the sails turned. Still, it turned. For 100 years, it turned. Grinding wheat, churning power, driving prosperity, until the day it sank into the ground, with no warning, as though yanked downward by invisible hands. Some believed it was punishment, that the land had grown tired of being used, that the wind, once harnessed and made to labor, had decided to collect its due. The village records note that days after the collapse, wind refused to blow. Birds stopped flying overhead. A dense stillness settled like a curse. But then came the carvings. 3 days after the event, a young boy wandering near the edge of the field noticed that the stones had changed. The spirals were deeper. The symbols multiplied. And new words had appeared, freshly carved, though no one had gone near them. One phrase repeated again and again. "The wind forgets nothing." Another said, "Your breath is borrowed." Terrified, the villagers attempted to exhume the mill. They dug for days, but every shovel of earth returned double by morning. The more they labored, the deeper the mill seemed to sink. Eventually, they stopped trying. They built a fence, and then they stopped speaking of it. By the 1700s, the mill was a myth. Only the tip of its highest blade remained above ground, like a warning finger frozen in time. Travelers avoided the path near Witherton. Locals claimed the wind screamed on certain nights. Those who tried to camp nearby reported whispering voices and vivid dreams of spirals spinning across the sky. In the 1800s, a surveyor named Elias Grinshaw rediscovered the site and became obsessed. He copied the carvings, mapped the buried stone ring, and wrote a paper claiming the mill had been built on a prehistoric energy line, one that resisted interruption. He disappeared during his final excavation attempt. His journal was found beside a newly carved stone that hadn't been there before. It read, "He asked too much of the breath." Today the area is overgrown, and the village itself has long since vanished. But the windmill blade is still there, rusted, half swallowed, sticking out of the ground like a bone through soil. No one can explain how the structure sank without damaging the nearby land. Geologists say the event is impossible. No sinkhole, no erosion, no records of earthquakes. But the stones remain. And on certain nights, they still change. Some hikers claim to hear the windmill turning beneath the ground, even though there's nothing left to turn. Others say if you place your ear to the old blade, you'll hear a hum, not mechanical, but vocal. A sound like breath in reverse, like the wind inhaling. And some believe that the carvings are warnings, not about the past, about the future. Because we still borrow the wind. Every turbine, every engine, every machine that bends the air to our will takes something. And maybe, just maybe, the old forces are still keeping track. So, if one day you find your city's towers sunken overnight, its power silenced, its structures half buried with spirals drawn into the concrete, remember Witherton. The wind never forgets its debt. The whirling tower that changed shape in every drawing. In a quiet town shadowed by hills and forgotten wars, there stood a tower that didn't quite belong. Built of warped timber and pale stone, the old windmill on the village edge had long since stopped turning. Its sails were cracked, the beams splintered. By every account, it should have been a ruin. And yet, it lingered. Present but unplaceable. Adults passed it without notice, but the children, they drew it. And none of them drew it the same way. Teachers began noticing first. Sketches from school assignments, draw your town, draw your favorite building, began featuring the old mill in ways no one could explain. One child drew it twisted like a corkscrew, reaching impossibly into the sky. Another shaded it in blackened stone, with stairs on the outside and windows that blinked like eyes. A third showed it melting into the hillside, as if it were being absorbed by the earth itself. And yet, when asked, they all insisted they'd drawn what they saw. Some dismissed it as childhood imagination, but others, particularly the village historian, grew uneasy. He collected over 60 of these sketches dating back years, some from children who'd moved away, a few from those who'd passed. He laid them side by side on the floor of his study and stared. No two were the same, but one detail appeared again and again. Symbols, etched along the base, carved into doors, floating above the tower like halos or warnings. They matched nothing from local folklore, no alphabet, no scripture, nothing human. Then the archaeologists came. A team was commissioned to stabilize the tower's foundation, which had begun to tilt after a harsh winter. They dug beneath the structure, expecting rotten roots and stones. What they found was something else. Chambers. Small, windowless, hidden rooms built far below the original foundation, walls lined with markings. The same markings the children had drawn for years. No one had seen them before. No blueprints mentioned them. No local memory recalled their construction. But the match was undeniable. The carvings were perfect replicas of what had appeared in the children's art. Markings no one else should have known existed, let alone copied with such eerie accuracy. Word spread. Some thought the children were lying. Others feared something older was at work. A few whispered about a pagan shrine or a temple built before the church ever came. But the tower remained, still, watching. One child, when questioned about her drawing, simply said, "It looked like that today. It won't tomorrow." Another added, "You can't remember it right unless you dream it first." The local priest, unnerved, began burning incense during his sermons. The school stopped assigning tower drawings altogether. But the children kept sketching, in margins, in dust, on chalkboards. One drew the tower with wings, another crumbling into the sky, and always the symbols. Then came the dreamers. Adults began to report strange visions, flashes of the tower in unfamiliar forms. One woman said she saw it wrapped in vines of glowing light. A farmer described it turning slowly, even though it had no sails. A teenager woke screaming, convinced he had climbed the stairs inside it for hours, only to find no top. Just a black room and a mirror that showed someone else's face. The town's archivist found a journal from the 1700s mentioning the tower in different terms. "The turning house," it read. "The shape never holds. Only the child eyes see it true." The rest of the page was torn out. Another record from 1821 described a mass hysteria incident at the village school. Students had all drawn the same image, an inverted tower plunging underground. No one could explain it. The incident was buried. A council was called. Should the tower be demolished? The local councilmen debated it late into the night, but one of them, a builder, confessed. "We've tried 3 times. Foundations collapse, equipment fails, and last time, our surveyor disappeared for 2 days. He came back barefoot, speaking a language no one knew. They left the tower standing. Eventually the drawings stopped, not because the children forgot, but because they began keeping them hidden, folded inside books, tucked into shoes, left as offerings beneath the tower's door. It was said if you drew it the way you saw it in your dreams and left the picture there, the dreams would stop, or at least change. Years later, one girl returned as an adult. She was a painter now, traveling through Europe. She told the librarian she'd spent her whole life trying to paint that tower exactly as she remembered it. But every time she got close, the painting changed overnight. Lines bent, shapes twisted. "It's like it's alive," she whispered, "like it doesn't want to be captured." And that, perhaps, was the truth. The tower didn't want to be known. Not truly. It wasn't built for understanding. It was built for reflection. A mirror with splinters. A door without hinges. Something that adjusted itself depending on who was looking, or when, or why. Because the real mystery wasn't just that the children drew it differently. It was that they drew it correctly. Every version was true. Every shape had been the tower, just not at the same time. And beneath its base, deeper than any archaeologist had reached, something remained. Waiting. Watching. Etching itself into memory, sketch by sketch, line by line, until someone finally saw it as it truly was. Not a building, not a ruin, but a thought. a thought with walls. The wind chamber that taught a scribe a lost alphabet. And imagine a circular stone chamber, high in the cliffs of an old monastery. Wind whistles constantly through its narrow slits, never ceasing, even in dead summer. It was built not as a cell, nor as a chapel, but as a kind of experiment, intended perhaps to purify thought through isolation and sound. For centuries, monks entered it in silence and left with visions or verses. But one monk didn't leave the same. He emerged not just changed, but fluent in something no one else could understand. He brought with him a new language, and no one could explain where it came from. The monk's name was Brother Anselm, a quiet scribe known for copying psalms with almost unnatural precision. He was devout, diligent, and deeply solitary. In the year 1283, he volunteered to spend a week in the wind chamber, a round, windowless tower designed by a reclusive abbot who believed divine insight came best through wind and stone. It was simple in design. One door, slitted vents carved precisely to catch the breeze and amplify it in harmonic tones, and bare stone all around. No candles, no parchment, just wind and time. But Anselm didn't return after a week, or two. When the brothers finally opened the chamber, they found him sitting cross-legged, eyes open, smiling faintly. Around him were pages, hundreds, filled with characters no one recognized, symbols that danced between runes and letters, too structured to be nonsense, too elegant to be madness. He had scrawled them with charcoal on his robe, his skin, and every stone near him. He said he hadn't written them. He said he only remembered them. He spoke softly, slowly, as if waking from a dream he couldn't fully leave. "The wind showed me the root," he whispered. "It carved speech from stone." The abbots assumed illness. They forbade him from writing further and burned the pages. But the stone resisted. Within days, the inside walls of the wind chamber began to change. Thin hairline carvings emerged, first faint, then deeper, etching the same symbols Anselm had drawn, as if the tower itself had begun to write. At first, the monks believed he was secretly engraving the walls, but Anselm never re-entered the chamber, and the growth continued. Symbols appeared overnight. The marks weren't random. They followed a structure. There were breaks, repetitions, and what appeared to be punctuation. And then something stranger. These markings formed loops, curls, glyphs that matched no known tongue. Scholars called in from distant cloisters could only agree on one thing. It wasn't gibberish. It obeyed rules. It evolved. Anselm, meanwhile, no longer copied Latin. He wrote only in the new script, claiming it wasn't a language to read but to remember. "It's not what you think it means," he told one friar. "It's what you've already forgotten." Some feared demonic influence. Others believed it was divine. But neither the church nor any scribe could translate it. The characters didn't correspond to any alphabet, ancient or modern. Yet Anselm said they contained stories. He could recite entire passages in silence, weeping without understanding why. Then the dreams began. Not just for Anselm, but for other monks who slept near the tower. They reported hearing wind whispering through walls, voices they couldn't place, thoughts that weren't their own. Some awoke with the urge to draw, symbols they couldn't recall learning. One novice carved a full paragraph into the wooden chapel floor during sleep. Another murmured a lullaby in the unknown tongue before collapsing. Anselm died within a year, peacefully, quietly. His final words, written in the strange script, were later translated by no one. They remained scratched into his headstone, untouched by moss or time, and yet, something remained active. The wind chamber continued to change, not just its walls, but its sound. Visitors claimed the tones inside began to shift subtly, melodic intervals appearing where there had only been wind before. A few claimed the tones mimicked syllables, that the chamber was trying to speak. In the centuries since, many have tried to study the symbols. Linguists, occultists, historians. A few researchers in the 20th century attempted to digitize the script, hoping that pattern recognition algorithms might decipher it. But the deeper they dug, the more they found that the language didn't follow logic. It followed memory. Certain sequences triggered emotional responses, fear, grief, nostalgia, not from the text itself, but from something beneath it, as if the writing reached not your mind, but your ancestry. One neurologist who entered the chamber claimed the script activated parts of the brain typically dormant. He said the characters bypassed interpretation and tapped directly into sensation. "It doesn't tell you things," he wrote. "It reminds you of things you never knew you forgot." Today, the wind chamber still stands. The tower is locked, but the wind passes through just the same. The inner walls remain covered, stone etched with the same looping, branching language no one dares clean or translate. The villagers nearby say the tone has changed again, that the song is slower now, that something is waiting. No one knows who or what Anselm encountered in that tower, but the idea remains that wind, stone, and silence together might carry something older than language, something not composed, but revealed, something not taught, but remembered when the world grows still. And perhaps, somewhere deep in our bones, the alphabet he learned is not lost, only waiting for the right wind to whisper it back. The gust tunnel that revealed hidden echoes of the dead. Imagine walking past a crumbling field on the edge of a forgotten village, long after the sun has dipped below the mossy hills, when the wind begins to rise, not from the sky, but from beneath your feet. A breath of air, ancient and strangely warm, snakes up through a hidden crack in the earth, and with it, words. Not just sounds, words. Names. Please. Last confessions whispered into the night by a voice no longer attached to a body. This wasn't a myth, it was a phenomenon. In the late 19th century, in a region of southeastern France known for its limestone tunnels and abandoned monastic crypts, a strange structure was rediscovered by accident. What began as a simple inspection for collapsed farm earth led to the unsealing of a stone-lined shaft buried for over 2 centuries. Inside, workers found a long, narrow wind duct, an architectural mystery, not tall enough to walk, yet too purposeful to be natural. It sloped gradually and twisted through the underground rock like a coil, clearly designed for the movement of air. But no one knew by whom or why. At first, no one paid it much attention. Locals assumed it was part of an old aqueduct or ventilation system for the monastic ruins above. But when autumn arrived, something changed. The air began to move. Not always, and never predictably, but on cold, windless nights, a steady gust would rise from the shaft, carrying with it a dissonant series of tones that almost mimicked language. And then, one night, a shepherd heard his mother's voice. Clear. Fragile. Repeating the words she had spoken on her deathbed a decade earlier. The man fled, swearing never to return. But rumors spread. Others came to listen. Some heard whispers they could not identify. Others wept, certain they were hearing the final moments of family members long buried. Scholars and skeptics arrived, expecting hoaxes. They brought phonographs, early recording cylinders, and instruments to measure sound and air pressure. What they captured shook them. The tunnel was producing vocal frequencies, patterns indistinguishable from human speech, not random. Repeated, scripted, as if trapped in the stones themselves. One engineer theorized the structure was a sonic archive, a system where the peculiar acoustics of the winding shaft and the porous limestone somehow retained echoes over time, like a crude magnetic tape. A strange idea, but others took it seriously, especially after a researcher accidentally triggered a gust by lighting a lantern at the shaft's mouth, changing the internal air pressure just enough to cause the tunnel to speak. The villagers began calling it La Bouche des Morts, the mouth of the dead. They built a fence around the tunnel, but it didn't stop people from coming. Some brought candles and prayers. Others brought gramophones and notebooks. A few came alone, only to be found days later sitting beside the shaft in silence, unable or unwilling to describe what they'd heard. What made it more unsettling was this. The tunnel had once connected to a series of catacombs beneath a ruined abbey, where plague victims were buried in haste centuries earlier. The shaft, it turned out, had been part of a pressure relief system designed to vent gas from the decaying bodies below. The design was functional, but no one could explain how or why voices, clear, structured voices, were surfacing now. By 1904, the French Academy of Sciences took interest. They deployed teams to examine the acoustics, pressure patterns, and subterranean layout. A breakthrough came when one physicist proposed that the limestone absorbed not just moisture, but resonance, trapping high-emotion vocalizations in microfractures. It was a fringe theory, bordering on the supernatural, but their recordings supported something impossible. The same voice patterns reoccurred on different days, under similar atmospheric conditions, as though the stones were replaying them. They weren't hallucinations. The duct was repeating something, and the words were not always kind. Some listeners heard screams, cries for forgiveness, laughter that ended in a choke, entire sentences, pleas for mothers, confessions of crimes, names of people no longer alive. These were not performances. They were fragments of lives unraveling. Local priests warned against further study. They claimed the duct was never meant to be opened again, that its design was not just functional, but ritual. Some believed the monks of the abbey had designed it to contain grief, guilt, or spiritual residue, not as an archive, but as a prison. By the time World War I arrived, the area was sealed off. Military engineers, fearing panic or disruption, poured concrete into parts of the tunnel and collapsed the surrounding passages. But the wind didn't stop. Even in the 1970s, hikers reported strange winds near the site, gusts that carried voices, laughter, sobs. A few university students tried to locate the duct again, but it had vanished beneath reforested ground and layers of deliberate silence. Or so it seemed. In 2012, a geological survey drone caught an anomaly, an underground cavity lined with unnatural symmetry near the old abbey site. The team didn't follow up. The land was marked unstable, but the recordings from the original phonographs, now digitized, circulate quietly among sound engineers and historical researchers. Some claim to have isolated over 30 distinct voices, each with unique tone, dialect, and phrasing. None of them match any known performer or recording from that era. One voice, believed to be from a child, simply repeats the phrase, "I didn't mean to," over and over, each time more distorted until the sound collapses into static. What were these echoes? A trick of limestone? A fluke of architecture? Or was it something else? A chamber that recorded pain? A duct built not just to relieve pressure, but to give memory a place to escape? The answers lie buried beneath layers of soil, stone, and fear. But if you walk the path alone on a still night, and the wind begins to rise beneath your feet, listen closely. You might not be the only one remembering. The tower that fell and revealed a spiral of marked bones. Imagine the wind howling across the moors, dragging storm clouds like torn curtains across a gray sky. Lightning splits the heavens, and in a single night, a great tower falls. The next morning, what stands in its place is not ruin, but revelation. Beneath the rubble of a long-forgotten windmill, workers uncover something no one expected. An underground chamber filled with bones. Not scattered remains, not the aftermath of war, but a spiral. A perfect spiral of femurs, each bone marked with strange repeating symbols. Each laid with precision, as if part of a design long forgotten by time. This is no legend from the edges of folklore. It's a record buried deep in regional archives, referenced only once in a handwritten note by a 17th century archivist cataloging storm damage in the northern provinces. He described a windmill collapse during a violent gale and the discovery of bone works beneath, a term unusual enough to suggest something more than a burial. His note included a drawing, a spiral, bones aligned by size and curvature, and at the center, what appeared to be a stone basin. The bones were not from animals. They were unmistakably human, dozens, possibly hundreds of femurs, arranged in widening concentric rings. Each bone bore a symbol, not carved by decay or random force, but etched with intention. Some resembled runes, others astrological signs, others untranslatable glyphs. But what stunned the workers wasn't just the arrangement. It was what they found at the foundation stones of the fallen tower. Those same symbols, repeated in a band, circling the base, hidden under centuries of stone and moss. Who built this? And why? The windmill itself had stood for generations. Local accounts described it as the mill that groaned, known for its eerie sounds during storms. It was said the foundation was unusually deep for such a structure, and the ground around it grew wild with strange moss that glowed faintly after rain. But no one questioned its origins. Windmills dotted the landscape. It had simply always been there, until it wasn't. When the chamber was cleared, the central basin was examined. It was not a baptismal font, nor a well. It was a bowl of red stone, smooth and cool, without cracks despite its age. In its center lay a single vertebra, larger than a human's, fossilized, marked with the same glyphs found on the femurs. Some believed it was a relic, others a warning, but the truth was, no one could explain it. Historians debated the site's purpose. Some argued it was an ossuary, a medieval bone house created during times of plague. But plague pits are chaotic, urgent mass graves. This was meticulous, sacred, deliberate. Others suggested it was a forgotten cult site, perhaps a solar order or wind-worshipping sect. But no such groups are recorded in the region's history. The symbols do not match known religious iconography, and no known church claimed the land. What troubled investigators most was the absence of skulls, ribs, or smaller bones. Only femurs arranged like spokes in a wheel, or blades in a fan. Some suggested it was symbolic. The femur, the body's strongest bone, perhaps representing endurance, structure, or passage. Or perhaps it was practical. Maybe the rest of the bodies were disposed of elsewhere. But even this fails to explain the precision. The spiral was not only geometric, it aligned with magnetic north. And then came the second discovery. Inside the tower's toppled remains, beneath a slab of weathered granite, workers found a sealed compartment. Inside, parchment scrolls written in a language no scholar could identify. The ink had faded to near invisibility, but with careful restoration, partial words emerged. Breath, binding, cycles, beneath, remember. One symbol, recurring at both the beginning and end of each line, matched those carved into the bones. Linguists struggled. Was it a code, a prayer, a record, or a containment spell? No one could say. Eventually, the bones were removed, cataloged, and placed in museum storage. The spiral was broken, the ossuary sealed, the land sold. A cottage now stands there, ordinary, silent, its garden blooming with flowers unnaturally vibrant in the spring. But locals say the wind behaves strangely near that house, that no matter how the trees sway, the air nearest the ground always twists clockwise, that animals refuse to pass near the original foundation, and that, during lightning storms, a hum can be heard, low, rhythmic, like distant chanting. Some call it nonsense. Others say the tower was not a windmill, but a monument, not a place of harvest, but of keeping, that the bones held something down, not commemorated the dead, but anchored them, and that removing the spiral broke something meant to stay whole. The village itself no longer marks the site, no plaque, no sign, just a bend in the road and an overgrown field. But if you walk there and place your hand to the earth, you might feel it, like a pulse or a breath, echoing from below. And if you listen, truly listen, the wind might carry the faintest whisper, "We are still arranged." The windmill that powered a clock with no visible gears. Imagine a windmill on a hill, not grinding grain, but telling time. No bells, no pendulums, just the wind turning its sails, and below them, a massive circular clock face etched into weathered stone. The townspeople called it the breather's clock. It had no ticking hands, no chimes, but somehow, each hour a shadow would pass over the dial in perfect sync with the sky, and no one could explain how it worked. This wasn't a myth. For over 2 centuries, the windmill of Halveth functioned as the only public timekeeping device for miles. Built in the late 1500s, it was said to have been commissioned not by a lord or a king, but by a reclusive monk named Aelius, who left no family, no writings, and no known apprentices. The records show only this, that he carved the face himself, aligned the tower to the stars, and disappeared shortly after its completion. The windmill had no visible mechanisms, no wires, no pulleys, and yet, its massive stone dial turned silently, precisely. At sunrise, the eastern rune glowed. At noon, a vertical line would shimmer. At dusk, the dial cast shadows that aligned with the town's temple bell, and always the sails above turned with the wind, but never too fast, never too slow, as if the sky itself was keeping the time. For generations, the people of Halveth trusted the clock more than their calendars. Merchants opened stalls when the western notch lit up. Farmers stopped work when the base stone rang with a vibration none could hear, only feel. It was rhythm. It was law. Until one day, it stopped. No wind, no shadow, no hour markers, just silence. The townspeople panicked. The crops were mistimed, bells rang late, prayers were missed. Time itself felt broken. They begged local masons to investigate. Craftsmen climbed the tower and pried open its outer stone casing. What they found stunned them. There were no gears, no moving rods. Instead, inside the stone were shallow carvings, patterns that pulsed faintly with the wind. They weren't metal. They weren't cut with tools. They seemed groan, etched into the mineral with impossible precision. Each line curved like wind paths, intersecting into what looked like a script, half mathematics, half music. Some sections glowed faintly at dawn, others warmed at sunset. The smiths tried to trace them, to map the pattern, but whenever they marked it down, the lines seemed to shift, like shadows underwater. One daring craftsman, Alrik Venn, attempted to replicate the mechanism using traditional gearwork. He forged copper wheels, inserted magnets, mimicked airflow. But nothing moved. The copy refused to turn. And after a week of testing, Alrik awoke to find his tools rusted overnight, and the windmill's original face now bore a new symbol, a spiral, carved where none had been before. Fear spread quickly. Some called it a curse, others a divine mechanism not meant to be touched. But a young scholar named Mira Ellen begged to differ. She studied wind currents, sound harmonics, and ancient runes. Her theory was that the windmill wasn't powered by the wind in a mechanical sense, but by resonance. That its blades, tower, and dial were all one unified body, resonating like an instrument, a natural clock that hummed with time itself. Mira stayed for years, documenting the structure. She recorded faint sounds at specific intervals, tones that repeated in 12-hour cycles. She discovered that when standing in the center of the stone floor at dusk, your pulse would sync with the vibrations, slower in winter, faster in spring. She theorized that the clock didn't just measure time, it felt it. That time was not being marked, but interpreted, like a language. Then, one morning, Mira vanished. Her notes remained. Dozens of pages detailing energy fields, sonic diagrams, and sketches of carvings that seemed to multiply each week. The last entry in her journal read, "It doesn't move because of wind. It moves because it remembers." After that, the town sealed the structure. The sails were locked, the tower chained. But the dial never stopped glowing. Even with the sails still, the marks pulsed once each hour. Tourists came to see it. Scientists dismissed it as an optical illusion, but locals knew better. The clock still worked. It simply chose when to show it. Today, few dare climb the tower. The air inside hums faintly, and the carvings have grown deeper, more intricate. Some say the tower records time differently now, that if you stay too long inside, you'll leave feeling days have passed, even if it's only been an hour. Some believe the clock is not counting forward, but winding down, and that when it stops again, it won't be the hours that vanish, but us. Because not all machines are built. Some are grown, some are summoned. Some emerge from forces older than understanding. The Halveth windmill didn't just keep time, it stored it. And perhaps, somewhere in its stone, every second it's ever counted is still echoing, waiting to be released. So, if you hear the hum, if your shadow crosses the dial at the wrong moment, don't wait. Leave, before the tower remembers your time too. The builder who heard the walls breathe before the blades moved. In the cold spring of 1811, in a windswept parish near the North Sea coast, a windmill stood half-built and silent, its white limestone bones reaching skyward like a question left unanswered. Locals had gathered to see it finished, their hopes pinned on the promise of bread and grain ground closer to home. But the mason who had been hired to complete the structure, a man named Ellis Croft, walked away mid-construction without payment, without farewell, and without a clear reason. He left behind only his tools and carvings in the stone no one could explain. The villagers called him mad. The man's been touched, they said. Too long in the quarry, too much lime in the lungs. But those who had worked with Ellis knew otherwise. He was meticulous, sober, devout. He measured 3 times, cut once, and whispered to the stones like they were old friends. So when he packed his tools and walked into the moor, leaving the windmill unfinished, people started asking why. A laborer from the site later said that Ellis had begun to behave strangely the week before he left. He stopped working before dusk. Even when the others kept hammering by lantern, he refused to place the final stones around the mill's inner chamber. When asked why, he only muttered, "They breathe. You don't hear it yet, but they breathe." Then he marked the stones, runes or symbols no one recognized, etched so deeply that not even decades of erosion have worn them away. Some thought it was blasphemy. Others believed it was a prank. But the mill remained unfinished for years. No one else would take the job. Every mason who arrived left within days, complaining of chills, migraines, or unsettling dreams. One spoke of a low hum inside the walls, like a breath drawn too slow to hear. Another said the stones vibrated beneath his hand, though the wind was still. It wasn't until 1836 that the structure was finally completed by an out-of-town firm. But even then, oddities continued. The blades turned during still weather, tools disappeared from locked sheds, children claimed to hear whispering near the base, and through it all, the markings left by Ellis remained, uncatalogued, untranslated. No language matched. Until one scholar, nearly a century later, made a connection that changed everything. In 1927, a folklorist named Adrian Kell unearthed an obscure manuscript while cataloging Norse mythic fragments. Among its pages were ritual chants and invocations to Ventius, the forgotten wind god of corners and hollows. Symbols used in those rites bore a striking resemblance to Ellis's carvings, not identical, but echoing the same spiral motif, the same angular slashes that mimicked wind paths. Kell believed Ellis had tapped into something old, perhaps unconsciously, through stone and instinct. His theory was dismissed. Coincidence, said the academic journals. But Kell was undeterred. He visited the mill himself. What he experienced there, he never wrote down. But his travel diary, found after his death, contained only 3 lines on the subject. It breathes. Ellis was right. I will not go back. The villagers still speak of the windmill with a kind of respectful distance. It functions. It grinds. But no one lingers. No one enters alone. The inner chamber, where Ellis refused to finish the stonework, is colder than the rest, even in summer. Candles flicker near its walls. Chalk marks drawn on the floor vanish by morning, and every attempt to whitewash or erase the strange etchings ends in failure. The markings return, as if recarved by unseen hands. One mason, years later, attempted to refurbish the stonework. He left within 48 hours, refusing pay. When asked why, he said only this: "You can feel it when your palm touches the wall, like a lung beneath the rock, like something waiting to exhale." Those who visit often remark that the wind behaves strangely around the tower. It gusts when the sky is clear. It halts when storms roll in. Sometimes it circles instead of pushing straight. Weather vanes nearby spin aimlessly for hours while the mill blades remain still or move in the wrong direction. There's a record of a priest who tried to bless the site in 1879. His journal says he heard a long, low sigh when sprinkling holy water along the interior chamber. He returned a week later to find his crucifix blackened and bent, and his shoes missing, found days later dangling from the top blade, too high for any man to reach without scaffold. Was the windmill cursed, or consecrated, or simply misunderstood? Whatever truth Ellis Croft heard in those walls, he never spoke it fully. He left no letters, no confessions, just stone, just symbols, just the echo of something deeper than breath, older than brick, woven into the mortar itself. Perhaps some buildings are built not to contain, but to awaken. Perhaps windmills, with their turning arms and hollow bellies, attract more than gusts. Maybe they stir things, call things, house things. And maybe Ellis knew. He knew the stones were not dead. He knew the walls had memory. That beneath the clean curve of every chisel mark was an old rhythm, something primal, something that once moved with wind and worship, long before bricks and wage and mortar. So he walked away, not in fear, but in reverence, because he didn't want to seal something in. He didn't want to wake it up. The mill that howled when secrets were spoken nearby. Imagine a windmill at the edge of a quiet medieval village, its sails always turning, even when the air is still. A place people pass without speaking, without glancing too long, as if the building itself is listening. And perhaps it was. Because in this village, a strange belief endured for centuries, that if you lied near the mill, if you whispered something false, or tried to conceal guilt, the windmill would groan. Sometimes a low moan like timber mourning, sometimes a violent screech that shattered stillness and startled birds from trees. The villagers said it could smell deceit. That truth disturbed it less than silence. And lies, well, They made it scream. The mill was built in the 14th century by a monastic order that vanished from the records only a decade after construction. Officially, it was for grain, but its location, atop a naturally echoing hill of limestone, was peculiar. More curious was its design. Hollow walls filled with carved flutes and narrow vents that caught and amplified wind. It made sound constantly, not mechanical groans, but layered tones. Sometimes it resembled breath, sometimes prayer. At first, it was admired. Travelers marveled at the music of the sails. Locals even believed the sound kept sickness away. But then the mill began to react. It started with a confession. A girl told her friend she had stolen a charm from the chapel, laughing nervously beneath the rotating blades. And as the words left her mouth, the mill's pitch deepened, warped, groaned like something wounded. She ran home crying. Her mother told her never to speak secrets near the tower again. Soon others reported the same. Adulterers, thieves, petty liars. Those who muttered falsehoods or hidden truths near the mill all swore they heard it groan or shudder in response. Even priests noticed. One recorded in his ledger, "I spoke comfort to a man I had not forgiven, and the mill groaned as if to remind me of my own hypocrisy." Children were warned. "Tell your lies where the wind can't hear," their mothers said. Some grew to fear the place entirely. Others tested it. They told bold lies near the sails, and when the wood moaned or the pitch shifted, they screamed and swore never to return. But the true mystery lay inside. For centuries, no one entered the mill's inner chamber. It was said to be cursed, or haunted, or simply unsafe. Until a storm in the early 1700s cracked part of the outer wall, revealing a hidden spiral staircase. What they found shook the village. Carved deep into the limestone walls were Latin inscriptions. Hundreds of them. Not decorative, not structural. Judgment verses. Verses not from scripture, but from a kind of moral code older than canon. Words like veritas scripta vento. Truth is written on the wind. Others read, confess or be echoed, and the voice of stone cannot lie. No one knew who carved them. The script matched no known monastic order. The inscriptions wrapped the walls like vines, crawling up into the roof, even across beams. Some sentences repeated. Some were distorted, like they had been copied from memory during fever. But the tone was clear. Truth mattered here, and lies were not tolerated. From that day on, the village treated the mill as sacred. Not holy, but watching. They began calling it the ear. If a dispute broke out, over land, marriage, money, it was said the mill would groan at the party who hid the truth, a kind of divine lie detector, with no judges but wind and wood. In 1856, a skeptical bishop ordered the mill decommissioned. He called it superstition, relic worship, nonsense. The sails were locked, the mechanisms jammed with iron, the noise stopped. But the village changed. People grew quiet. Disputes dragged longer. The local confessor said his penance lines shrank overnight. One day, a farmer's son snuck into the locked mill with friends. They shouted lies at each other, mocking the old stories. That night, a storm tore the sails from the tower. The sound returned. Not groaning, but a sharp rising screech that echoed across the valley. No wind had caused it. The bishop resigned soon after. The sails were repaired, but the villagers refused to silence it again. Some truths, they said, need listening walls. In the decades that followed, researchers visited, recording the acoustics. The interior walls hummed with strange resonance. Whisper near one stone, and another echoed the sound seconds later. The carvings, once dismissed, were found to match fragments of forgotten ecclesiastical texts, early penitential codes, and oral laws passed down outside formal doctrine. It wasn't just superstition. It was memory, etched in stone. Today the mill still turns, quietly, listening. Tourists visit, pose, leave, but villagers remain cautious. Older residents still walk the long way around, especially if their hearts are heavy. And if you speak near the tower, say something half true, or something you hoped no one heard. Listen closely. If the wind shifts, if the mill creaks off rhythm, if the air suddenly feels too sharp, it might be the tower reminding you. Some places don't care what you say, only what you mean. Because in the oldest parts of the world, truth doesn't just live in scripture. Sometimes it hides in the walls, waiting, listening, echoing your secrets back to you. until you finally understand what silence never forgot. The wind tower that worked only when a specific family slept. Imagine a windmill that does not turn with the weather, but with blood, specifically the dreams of a single family. In a quiet northern village, long ignored by maps and modernization, there stood a tower of stone and timber known as the Old Wind Watch. It wasn't just a mill, it was a riddle, one that had resisted understanding for centuries, because it spun only under one condition, when a member of the Howcroft family was asleep. By day, the blades hung still, even in the fiercest winds. Local farmers cursed it, engineers inspected it. Every mechanism inside was in perfect order. No rust, no jammed gear, no imbalance, and yet it refused to move. But every so often, on still nights when no wind stirred, villagers would wake to the rhythmic groaning of the blades slowly turning in the dark. No one believed the pattern at first, but as far back as anyone could remember, the mill's eerie turning always coincided with one thing: a Howcroft sleeping nearby. Even if the night was calm, even if no other windmill turned for miles. It became a joke, a superstition, until the local pastor documented it across 20 years in his journal, noting dates, weather patterns, and confirmed sleeping schedules. The correlation was undeniable. In 1887, a traveling scientist named Dr. Cedric Althum took interest. He proposed an experiment. He arranged for every family in the village to sleep in the same house, one night at a time. On each attempt, nothing. But on the seventh night, when the Howcrofts took their turn, barely an hour into slumber, the blades began to move. No breeze, no storm, just a slow, haunting churn. The scientists tried it again, changing locations, timing, and room arrangements. Still, only when the Howcrofts slept would the mill awaken, and only then. Then came the real mystery. While inspecting the inner walls of the mill's upper chamber, sealed off since the early 1700s, workers found something beneath a layer of lime plaster: stone engravings. Not flower markings, not guild symbols, faces, 6 of them, weathered but distinct. One looked almost exactly like Elias Howcroft, the family's current patriarch. Another bore a likeness to his great-grandmother, dead for over 40 years. The images weren't recent. The carbon dating later confirmed the carvings were at least 400 years old, but the family records said otherwise. Their oldest known ancestor, Thomas Howcroft, arrived in the village in 1693, drawn there supposedly by a dream of wind and blades and a stone tower. That story had always been dismissed as romantic folklore, until now. The implications stunned even skeptics. How could a structure built before the family existed bear their faces? Why would it activate only in response to their unconscious state? Dr. Althum suggested a theory, radical at the time, but chilling. He believed the windmill was not a tool, but a sensor, not a machine for milling, but for recording. He posited that the tower was ancient, possibly pre-Christian, and built not to process grain, but to detect a certain genetic signal, or perhaps something stranger, like a recurring dream frequency embedded in a bloodline. Other researchers proposed that the mill was a kind of sympathetic mechanism tied to ancestral resonance, a concept found in various ancient cultures. That perhaps when the Howcrofts slept, their shared memory activated a dormant system, one built to respond not to motion, but to legacy. But what system? And why? Some speculated the mill was part of a forgotten communication network, one that linked dreams to movement, thoughts to structure. Perhaps it sent signals, or received them. Others believed it stored memory, that it was built by people who knew the Howcrofts long before the Howcrofts existed. As more carvings were revealed, symbols resembling early Indo-European runes, star patterns, and spiraled glyphs, the mystery deepened. One researcher from Oxford insisted the markings described not machines, but inheritance loops, patterns in consciousness meant to carry ancestral memory forward, much like genetic material. Local villagers grew uneasy. Some demanded the tower be sealed. Others began watching the Howcrofts with wary curiosity. Were they haunted? Chosen? Or simply cursed to carry the key to a message no one else could understand? The family moved away in the 1920s, and with them, the windmill fell silent. Despite numerous attempts, the mill never turned again, not even during the Great Storm of 1933, when every other wind-driven device in the county spun violently. The Howcrofts, now scattered across the country, refused interviews. Some believe they feared what the mill might still remember, but the tower still stands. Its stones bear the same faces, unchanged. Its gears remain clean, unworn. And sometimes, when the mist rolls through the valley at night, locals say the air around it feels charged, as if something is waiting. Not for wind, but for a dream. One only a Howcroft can dream. The apprentice who disappeared. After finding the wind map, imagine apprenticing in a windmill, where the groan of gears, the rhythm of blades, and the echo of stone surround your every waking moment. You are young, precise, observant. You learn to listen to the creak of the sails and the grind of the millstones. And one day, while clearing dust from the inner tower wall, you find something no one mentioned in the old plans, a panel that shifts. Behind it, carved directly into the stone, is a map, not of roads or rivers, but of wind. Patterns of air, etched with symbols, spirals, and directions that seem to breathe as you study them. That apprentice's name has been lost to history, but the story that followed is still whispered in the north. He was the millwright's only student, sharp, quiet, and diligent. The mill stood on high ground, catching strong gales year-round. Generations had maintained it, but this boy noticed something odd. The sound the wind made near the western wall, it pulsed differently, and when he pressed on one of the stones, it moved. Behind it lay the wind map. A spiraling diagram, more art than architecture, carved with impossible precision into the inner layer of stone. Lines curled in on themselves, crossed symbols, then flared outward toward tiny holes in the wall, ventilation shafts, or something older. He showed no one. Not the millwright. Not the village elders. He returned each night to study it, sketching it in charcoal, tracing the lines with calloused fingers. He began to write notes in the margins of his manual, notations no one else could read. The wind, he said, was layered. It did not simply blow. It moved in circuits, returned upon itself, whispered secrets when the pressure was right. Then he disappeared. No warning, no letter. Just his tools left behind, neatly arranged next to a hole in the mill's foundation that no one remembered being there. A narrow tunnel, carved by hand, leading into the hillside. Damp, cold, unmapped. A place no apprentice should have been able to dig alone. Search parties entered the tunnel, but they found nothing. It twisted, then forked, then curved back on itself like a maze. And after 20 meters, it simply ended. No collapse, no signs of struggle, just silence. The villagers sealed the tunnel, called it a delusion, said he ran away, but the wind changed after that. It no longer turned the sails the way it used to. The grain took longer to grind. Storms came in from unfamiliar directions. And when the wall was examined again, the wind map was gone, smoothed over, as if it had never existed. Historians dismiss the tale as rural superstition. A boy who fled, a cave that frightened locals, a story born from grief. But fragments remain. A torn notebook found years later in a chimney flue during repairs. Pages damp and scorched, but legible. Drawings of the wind map, spirals, arrows, notations in a script no one recognized. One phrase repeated across the margins. It doesn't blow from above, it circles beneath. What did he find? Theories abound. Some say the wind map was a relic, left by a vanished civilization that understood air not just as weather, but as energy. That the map wasn't for millwrights, but for builders of engines or portals. Others believe the wind itself was being channeled, directed underground, used to power something buried beneath the hill, something the apprentice disturbed. The tunnel, they say, was not an excavation. It was a reactivation. More fantastical stories say the boy didn't vanish. He followed the wind. That the tunnel was not an escape, but an entry. Into chambers deeper than the village, older than the tower. Into a system that still hums faintly when the wind is just right. Travelers say the grass near the sealed mill grows in spirals. That birds fly around the hill but never over it. And that, if you press your ear to the earth on stormy nights, you can hear the turning of gears. Not stone, but something older, slower, deeper. No body was ever found. No replacement apprentice was ever trained. The mill still stands, but it no longer functions. Its blades turn idly, groaning in protest, catching winds that seem to twist out of alignment. The village has grown around it. New homes, paved roads, quiet cafes, but no one touches the tower. Children dare each other to approach it. No one stays long. As for the wind map, its replica remains locked in a museum drawer, catalogued but never displayed. Scholars cannot identify the script. Engineers cannot explain its function. The only thing certain is this: the map was not meant to be found, and once it was, something changed. Sometimes, history isn't written in wars or treaties, but in vanishing, in absence, in tunnels that shouldn't exist, and winds that no longer obey. The apprentice left no legacy, no children, no grave, but his story lingers, carried not on pages, but on air, his sketches, the map, the whispered wind. So, if you walk near that mill and feel a gust where there should be calm, or hear a faint whistle underground, don't follow it. Some maps were drawn to be read only once, and some winds, once stirred, never settle again. The tunnel that played voices when wind passed through it. Imagine a tunnel beneath a forgotten windmill, carved into ancient stone, sealed by time, and silent for most of the year. But when the wind changes direction, just so, it breathes. And when it breathes, it speaks. Not moans, not echoes. Voices, clear human voices, full sentences, questions, warnings, spoken in perfect dialects of people long dead. Villagers of Rothwin claimed that the tunnel beneath their windmill wasn't built for drainage or storage. It was built to speak. And when the wind was right, it remembered every word it had ever heard. This phenomenon wasn't myth. Documented as far back as 1712, the tunnel, later called the wind speaker shaft, was first discovered when workers repairing the base of an aging mill opened a stone slab beneath the foundation. Beneath it, a perfect cylindrical shaft, descending into darkness, smooth-walled and cold as ice. No stairs, no ladders. Just a single iron ring bolted into the lip, as if someone had once been lowered in. The shaft went 60 feet down before it bent at a sharp angle, disappearing beneath the hill. No one dared crawl in. But when the wind blew down from the moorlands, especially in autumn, a whisper would rise from the opening. At first, it was mistaken for wind. Then, words began to form. Phrases like, "I never reached the stone," or "He knows what we buried." Some villagers said they heard their own names. Others heard songs their mothers used to sing. And always the sound was clearest just after sunset. Eventually, a priest was sent from the Abbey of Elmar to investigate. He brought scribes and masons and tried to seal the shaft with iron and wax. But the next morning, the wax was shattered and the ring was red hot. One scribe swore he heard a woman whispering in his ear that night, only to find no one nearby. Another became mute after descending partway into the shaft with a torch. When he returned, his hair had turned white. Then came the carvings. When scholars were finally permitted to examine the tunnel walls, they found them covered with symbols, not scratched in, but embedded, like the stone had formed around them. Thousands of them, spiraling in precise alignment with the curve of the shaft. Not one was repeated. Linguists from across the continent visited the site. None recognized the language, but acoustic engineers noticed something strange. The layout of the symbols seemed to match certain harmonic frequencies. It was as if the tunnel wasn't just carved to carry sound, but to shape it. And the voices? They changed. In 1763, the wind recited a passage from a poem not yet written. In 1802, it spoke of a storm that hadn't happened, and then did 3 days later. In 1850, a schoolmaster recorded a full minute of speech that seemed to reference machinery that wouldn't be invented for another century. The shaft didn't just echo the past, it whispered the future. But not to everyone. Only certain people heard the clearest voices, often those who had secrets. One merchant, after mocking the stories, claimed the wind called him a thief. He vanished weeks later. A child who had wandered too close was found repeating a phrase in perfect Latin, though he'd never been taught the language. He died in his sleep that night, hands clenched around a smooth stone no one had seen before. Attempts to destroy the tunnel failed. Explosives didn't ignite. Cement wouldn't set. Eventually, the villagers built a cage around the shaft and declared it off limits, but the voices never stopped. Even now, hikers report faint whispering beneath their boots as they walk the old mill path. And some nights, windows in nearby houses rattle, not from storm, but from sound. Today, the windmill above is long gone, burned in 1921 under unclear circumstances, but the tunnel remains, a perfect circle in the earth, still humming, still speaking. Some believe it's a memory device, something built to store voices, knowledge, even prophecy. Others think it's not a tunnel at all, but a throat, a passage not meant to carry air, but language, not to drain water, but to channel thought. Perhaps not built by people, but by something that listened for centuries before it finally spoke. And the runes? Some scholars now believe they're phonetic instructions, not just writing, but encoding. A frozen symphony of every word ever whispered near the site. A library made of wind and stone. In the early 1900s, a group of military engineers from the Royal Signal Corps visited Rothwin, hoping to harness the tunnel's peculiar acoustics for battlefield communications. They set up brass receivers and phonograph recording devices at the mouth of the shaft. What they captured defied explanation. Layered voices speaking simultaneously, some recognizable English, others in languages no one could place, some in reversed syllables, some repeating dates, coordinates, and full names of the officers present. When the team returned to London, the recordings were quietly classified. One of the engineers, Captain Richard Lyle, kept a personal copy of the phonograph disc. He played it years later on his deathbed and reportedly muttered, "It said my wife's name before I ever met her." A folklorist named Beatrice Corr spent nearly a decade living in Rothwin during the 1930s, compiling oral histories of those who'd grown up near the windmill. Her unpublished manuscript contains accounts from children who used to throw flowers into the shaft and swear they could hear someone thanking them from below. One girl recalled dreaming of a spiral staircase descending into red-lit stone and waking up with clay beneath her fingernails. Corr died in 1941 during an air raid, oddly not in London, but while camping near the sealed tunnel. Her journal was found open on her lap, her last written line, "It only speaks when no one listens." And yet the tunnel endures. Modern researchers have avoided it, citing its instability. But some suspect they simply don't want to be recorded by the air itself. Because whatever created that shaft, be it human, elemental, or something older, it didn't just build a tunnel, it built a witness. And witnesses remember. So if you ever find yourself on a windswept hill where no birds sing, and the ground hums with breath, listen closely. The air might speak. It might say something you've never heard. Or worse, it might say something only you were meant to hear. The windmill that stored air in sealed stone chambers. They thought it was just another relic. Another weathered windmill built sometime before the village even had a name. Its sails were gone, its shaft shattered, and ivy choked the outer stones like time itself was trying to reclaim it. But beneath that crumbling ruin, beneath the rot and dust, was a design no one expected. A system carved into stone, sealed chambers, coiled like lungs around the heart of the structure. It wasn't just a windmill, it was a machine. And the wind, they discovered, had never left. It began with a restoration project. The villagers, wanting to preserve their forgotten landmark, called in historians and masons to secure the base before the rains destroyed it completely. What they found underground astonished everyone. Chambers, massive stone vaults sealed tight with resin and metal that hadn't corroded after centuries. Not cellars, not crypts, and not for grain. One chamber was accidentally breached during excavation. The stone split with a sharp crack, and out rushed a burst of air so fast and high-pitched it knocked one worker backward. They described it as a scream made of wind. Seconds later, the air inside the entire ruin shifted. Pressure changed. Dust lifted from the floor. And then, the walls began to speak. It wasn't a voice, exactly. It was an echo. A phrase repeated again and again in a language no one recognized. Not English, not Latin, not Norse or Saxon. A sound like syllables layered with breath and pulse, bouncing from stone to stone, fading only after hours had passed. The recording equipment set nearby picked it up, but couldn't decipher it. Linguists were baffled. Audio experts thought it might be some form of coded resonance. One researcher, less afraid to speculate, called it a pressure memory. The theory was radical. That sound could be stored in stone under the right conditions. That wind, trapped for centuries in a sealed chamber under compression, could carry with it vibrations, voices, impressions of language, And when released, those vibrations struck the architecture just right to echo back intelligible fragments. Not recorded sound, but fossilized speech. But whose voice, and why seal it? Architectural analysis revealed a complex network of stone passageways leading from what would have been the mill's central gear system directly into the walls, like veins. Some of these ended in sealed domes lined with spiral carvings, likely tuned to certain frequencies. One, they realized, had been intentionally packed with layers of reeds and hollow bone, primitive acoustic filters. It was not accidental. Someone had designed this to catch the wind, trap it, shape it, and release it later. What kind of society builds a windmill not to grind, but to store messages in the air itself? No record existed of its builders. The oldest maps only show a marker, hollow wheel, not in use. No town legend explained the symbols etched into the stone, but one village elder recalled a family tale about the mill that could speak to the clouds. His grandmother had warned never to whistle near the ruins, lest it answer you. The team began testing the remaining chambers. Most were left sealed. But one smaller vault, once exposed, released a different kind of sound. Not words this time. Music. A haunting, warbling melody played through shifting wind. It lasted less than 5 minutes, but every person present reported a different emotional reaction. One woman wept. A man claimed he smelled sea air. Another said it reminded him of a lullaby he had never heard before, but somehow knew. The carvings within this vault were more intricate. Spirals within spirals, waveforms carved into the stone itself. Someone, centuries ago, had encoded more than just breath. They had left behind feeling, memory, time itself twisted into architecture. That night, the wind picked up, but not outside, inside. The structure began to moan, not loud, but constant, like breath forced through a reed pipe. No source was found. The passageways remained empty. Yet the sound continued, rhythmic and soft, like a sleeping beast exhaling. Eventually, local authorities sealed off the site. Not because it was dangerous, there was no collapse, no poison, no fumes. But because no one could explain what was happening, the team left. Equipment vanished. One researcher returned a month later, only to find the vaults humming again, despite being sealed. She left behind a single note. The wind remembers. Today the site is locked, marked only by a rusted gate and an overgrown path. The windmill's outer frame still stands, its shadow stretching longer than seems natural in the morning light. On quiet days, locals say you can hear music drifting from the stones. Some say it's birdsong. Others say it's voices, repeating something lost before writing was born. And those who dare approach close enough swear they feel it. Pressure, slight and urgent, behind their eardrums, as if something is waiting, listening, preparing to speak again, because the windmill didn't break. It was designed to wait. And now that air has memory and stone has breath, perhaps nothing, not even silence, can keep it quiet forever. The mill that only spun when no one watched it. Imagine a village where everyone knew the rules of the wind. Trees bent, clothes dried, and flags danced in the breeze. But one structure, high on a hill above the fields, never moved when watched. A windmill, perfectly constructed, with wide wooden blades. Silent. Still. Motionless in daylight. But by morning, always different. The blades had shifted position. The door had creaked open and sometimes, just sometimes, footprints marked the grass leading toward it, but never back. The villagers called it the waiting mill. Built generations ago, its stone walls were clean, its gears untouched by time. Every examination found it functional. The sails were balanced, the wind strong, yet it remained frozen every time someone looked. Children dared each other to watch it for hours. Men camped nearby. No matter the wind, it would not spin, not even once, while eyes were on it. But at dawn, always a new angle, always a turn, slight, subtle, undeniable. And inside, something stranger. The spiral staircase leading into the tower's upper chamber showed signs of wear. Scribes who studied stone said the steps had grown smooth, not from weather, but from footsteps, thousands of them, as if someone, something, climbed them every night. The village priest believed it was holy, that the mill was touched by divine mystery. It turns only for God, he once said, and he needs no witness. Others were less charitable. A herder who lived nearest claimed to hear groans at midnight, wooden creaks, soft thuds, and the dragging sound of sacks across stone. When he ran outside to look, silence, stillness. But by morning, one blade had turned 90 degrees, and a faint smell of ash drifted through the air. A local carpenter once locked himself inside the mill overnight, determined to solve it. He set traps, tied thread across the stairs, marked the blades with chalk. But when morning came, the chalk was gone, the traps untouched, and the man, he refused to speak for 3 days. When he finally did, he simply said, "It wasn't empty." The inside of the mill offered few clues. No dust, no rats, no signs of use. Yet the floorboards were worn. The walls, though plain, vibrated faintly at night, as if holding memory. The stairs were the most mysterious. Stone steps, once sharp-edged, now curved and smooth. Scholars from the capital sketched them, argued over erosion rates. One whispered that it was like watching time pass unnaturally fast, but only in one place. The village record keeper noticed something else. An old chronicle from a century prior mentioned the mill in passing, but noted its sails were black-stained, never still. Later records show less activity, less description, as if the mill had slowly chosen stillness, as if it preferred privacy. Some wondered if watching it somehow paralyzed it, not from shame, but from secrecy, that it could not be what it was while seen. Children began saying the mill moved only when no one believed it could. That doubt was its energy. That certainty kept it still. A visiting philosopher took interest, claiming it represented a paradox of motion, an observer trap. But when he stayed the night to prove his theory, he vanished. His bedroll was found by the door. The next morning, the blades had completed a full rotation. One parchment note remained. It watches back. As years passed, the villagers stopped trying to explain it. They avoided the hill after dark. The mill became a fixture, not feared, not worshipped, just accepted. Bread was still baked, harvests still ground, but never in that mill. Never again. Some claimed the building had its own reasons, that it moved for a different kind of work, a work not meant for human hands. Today it still stands, unmarked, unpowered. No mechanisms connected to any modern system. It is just there, watching the fields, turning only when alone. And each time someone ascends the worn staircase, they swear the steps feel warm, used, not ancient, recent. So if you ever find yourself in a quiet valley and see a windmill high on a ridge, still, silent, unmoving, look away, then look again, and again, and again. And if it never spins while you watch, don't take comfort, take caution, because some wheels turn for eyes unseen. Some machines remember footsteps we never took, and some truths only reveal themselves when no one is watching. The crumbled wall that revealed a wind-driven script generator. Imagine a gust of wind, not through leaves, not across grass, but against stone, and that wind, instead of merely whistling or howling, turns something, hidden deep in the bones of an ancient wall. This is not folklore. It happened. And what it revealed sent ripples through both the scientific and religious communities of Europe. In the summer of 1906, a violent thunderstorm struck the outskirts of a small village nestled in the Carpathian foothills. Lightning split a sycamore tree that had long grown beside an abandoned windmill. As the tree collapsed, it shattered part of the mill's retaining wall, exposing a cavity no one knew existed. Inside was a strange sight. Slats of stone, stacked like thin fins, rotating slowly in the breeze. But they weren't just mechanical parts. They were etched with intricate symbols. The villagers initially assumed it was just weather-worn debris. But the slats were not loose rubble. They were attached to a concealed system, rotating on brass axles, arranged with eerie precision. The wind, funneled by a narrow gap in the wall, caused them to spin, with a rhythm both random and hypnotic. And as each slat turned, it revealed new carvings, symbols, glyphs, some unfamiliar, others unmistakably sacred, variations of Christian crosses, angelic sigils, even ancient Hebrew characters. What stunned investigators was the mechanism's autonomy. There were no gears, no pulleys, no signs of modern design. The system operated purely by wind pressure, channeled through curved stone veins carved into the walls themselves. It was an engine, but not for grinding grain or pumping water. It was a script generator. Historians and archaeologists from 3 countries converged. They documented the slats as they rotated, noting the sequences and frequency. One linguist identified dozens of unique combinations that resembled fragments of biblical psalms, some word for word, others warped as if translated through time or intention. The machine, it seemed, was speaking, or perhaps remembering. Carbon dating showed that the stone slats were older than the mill itself, much older. Some may have predated the surrounding village by nearly 800 years. Yet the craftsmanship was unlike anything in local records. The brass axles, though now green with age, were fitted so precisely into the rock that no mortar was needed. The movement was smooth, effortless, designed. But by whom? One theory held that the structure was built by a medieval order of monks known for encoding religious texts in unconventional formats, but no documentation matched. Another scholar proposed it was a tool for prayer, that rotating symbols might invoke divine attention. But this didn't explain the precision engineering, or why the wall had been sealed so perfectly that it hadn't been discovered in centuries. Then came the chilling part. As more slats were revealed and cataloged, a pattern emerged. Each new gust seemed to complete older symbol sequences. The machine wasn't random. It remembered where it left off. It progressed. Some began calling it the breath-powered scriptorium. A researcher from Krakow devised a way to simulate wind in controlled bursts, using bellows to push air through the ducts. The slats responded. On one attempt, the symbol spelled out a line nearly identical to a 10th century prayer found in a lost gospel variant. Another time, it produced markings found only in early apocryphal texts, unknown to anyone in the region at the time the slats were supposedly created. Religious leaders became divided. Some claimed it was a miracle, proof of divine inscription. Others called it heresy, a trick, a mechanical blasphemy wrapped in sacred disguise, and then it stopped. After months of observation, the mechanism abruptly jammed. No damage, no wear, just stillness, as if it had finished, or decided to rest. Attempts to disassemble or repair the device failed. Each time a slat was removed or studied outside the wall, it went inert, refusing to rotate again. Whatever force animated it worked only within the wall's geometry. Only when wind moved through that hidden channel, only when undisturbed. In frustration, some scholars began to leave, but others stayed, quietly documenting every remaining surface. They mapped the air veins, the stone flow patterns, even temperature changes during slat movement. One physicist suggested the wall was an atmospheric resonance chamber, translating pressure into motion, motion into language. He believed it might have once been part of a larger structure, perhaps a temple or observatory, designed to convert wind into text. But no such structure was ever found. Today, the site remains locked behind a preservation fence. The slats are visible, but still. Villagers say that once every few years, on a night when the wind howls just right, a faint clicking sound can be heard behind the stone, like pages turning, like memories shifting in a place where memories should not live. The carvings, now cataloged in over 3,000 pages, continue to puzzle scholars. Some insist they hold a prophecy, waiting to finish. Others believe it is simply a forgotten machine. But a few say the truth is more intimate, that the wall does not speak to us, it listens. And every time the wind returns, it answers with symbols drawn not from stone, but from us. Because maybe we weren't the first to wonder. Maybe we were just the first to read aloud what the wind already knew. The tower's stone cap that spun in opposite direction to wind. Imagine a medieval windmill, tall, proud, and weather-worn, rising above the fields like a watchful sentinel. Its blades creak in the breeze, slow and steady, catching the wind as they always have. But look closely. At the very top, the cap of the tower, the heavy stone crown built to stabilize the structure. It's moving, not with the wind, against it. Slowly, unnaturally, impossibly, it rotates in the opposite direction, as though defying the very force that powers it. This is not legend. This is record. A 15th century mill in a now vanished village, known only through fragments, parchment letters, scattered illustrations, and one damaged floor plan found buried in the archives of an abbey. The tower's cap, made of solid quarried stone, was mounted on a circular base that allowed it to turn. But it did so against the prevailing wind. No gearwork accounted for it. No manual explanation described it. It was simply noted by a visiting scholar as the crown that moves counter to breath. Inside the tower, beneath the cap, were strange carvings, not decorative, not religious. Rows upon rows of chisel marks arranged in tight spirals. When deciphered centuries later, they revealed phrases, repeated lines in an archaic dialect, describing something called the counter air. Not a gust or a current, but a force. One that resists, watches, turns in opposition to motion itself. The villagers called it a blessing at first. The windmill operated in perfect balance. Its grain was finer than any produced for miles. But some spoke of oddities. The wind around the tower always felt wrong. Birds avoided it. Fire refused to rise near it. And those who climbed to the upper floors reported vertigo, whispers, and the eerie sensation of being watched by something behind them, though no one stood there. What made the tower truly unique was the ring. Around the base of the cap, etched deeply into the stone, were concentric circles of inscription. No one could read the outer ring. The language was lost. But the inner circle bore a phrase repeated 12 times. To turn against is to be seen. It was not clear whether this was warning or instruction. The phrase was found again in smaller script on the corner of a vellum scroll discovered in the mill's foundation. Charred and almost unreadable. That scroll also described a rite of reversal, though most of it had faded to ash. No documents recorded who built the windmill, only that it stood before the church was raised, before the roads were laid. It appeared to have always been there, and unlike other mills, it needed no realignment. The cap turned as it pleased, seemingly governed by some internal rule rather than external force. It rotated even on windless days, and on stormy nights it would spin in slow, silent revolutions that no one dared to observe for long. Then one winter, the movement stopped. The villagers at first were relieved. The unease that had clung to the structure faded, but the relief was short-lived. The grain began to spoil. Fires wouldn't stay lit. The sky above the tower darkened with unnatural frequency. The well dried. A child went missing. And the winds, when they came, blew in spirals, leaving scorch-like patterns in the grass. When a group of masons attempted to dismantle the cap, they found their chisels dulled, their ropes frayed, and one of their number paralyzed from the neck down, struck not by stone, but by air. Eventually the site was abandoned. The tower crumbled over the centuries, but the stone cap remained, intact, half buried in the earth like a fossil. It was relocated once, briefly to a museum, but within weeks, electrical interference forced its removal. Today, it lies sealed in a subterranean chamber, catalogued under a nondescript code, its inscriptions recorded but untranslated. What was the counter air? A metaphor, a force, a presence. Some believe it was a remnant of pre-Christian ritual, a belief in balance, reversal, and observation. Others say it was an experiment in ancient physics, a structure meant to harness opposition, to catch not wind but whatever pushed against it. And a few, the quietest, most careful few, suggest it was a beacon, not a mill, that the spinning cap sent a message, not upward, but inward, into some layered reality beneath the visible one, a signal to something that listens only when the air resists. Today, the field where the tower stood remains uncultivated. Crops refuse to grow. Locals avoid the area, citing headaches, strange dreams, and a sense of reversal, as though time bends slightly there. Pilgrims come occasionally. Some claim to hear the faint grinding of stone beneath their feet, a low hum in the air when the wind is still. The past holds many mysteries. Some are waiting to be solved. Others are meant to stay sealed in stone. The cap that spun backward may not have defied the wind. It may have obeyed a different kind of force entirely, one we've forgotten how to name. So, if you find yourself walking in circles, feeling watched when alone, or seeing the world tilt subtly against itself, remember the warning: to turn against is to be seen.